Hi, welcome back to the Jem Hawkes YouTube channel. Thank you for continuing to watch and support me here on YouTube and over on Facebook too. Lovely to have your company once again. Now today I want to talk about Swarovski Cup Chain. I have little bits and pieces of this all around the place from projects I've used in the past. So what we're going to learn today is how to create a cold formed bezel using cup chain. And this is Swarovski. It's a gold plated with quite small, I think these are 3mm round facet crystals. This will work on the larger sizes of cup chain as well. It's a really lovely technique. Just takes a little bit of finger and thumb strength to get the technique going, and then it really is accessible to absolutely everyone. If you'd like to join me down at the board, I'll talk you through the materials we'll need today. So I have a length of the Swarovski cup chain. This is, as I say, a gold tone colour or a gold plated colourway with white crystals or clear crystals inside. And I've got more than enough than I need to encircle the cabochon that I have in question. Now this technique is going to work better with shallow cabochons rather than great big deep cabs like this one. So if you have some shallow cabochons that you'd like to use up, here is an example of how it can be used as a component rather than a standalone piece. So we've cold bezeled around this absolutely gorgeous kyanite in the centre here, and this is using the same cup chain. Now the wires that I'm going to use are 1mm or 18 gauge and 0.4mm or 26 gauge, and I've got maybe 16 to 18 inches of both of those. I'm just going to put the 0.4, the lighter gauge, 26 gauge out of the way for the moment. And what I'm going to do is cut in half so that I've got two sort of 7 to 8 inch lengths of the 1mm or 18 gauge wire. And I'm just going to make sure that those are nice and smooth because they need to be able to run absolutely parallel. So they don't need to be perfectly straight, but if they are slightly warmed, it will indeed help you to get a nice finish on the piece that you're working with. So the cup chain that I'm using, as I say, is I think 3mm crystals. And what we want to do is just circle that around the outside of the cabochon and go from around about the 1 o'clock to the 11 o'clock position. I'm just going to use my nail to highlight where that is happening, and to cut cup chain, I'm just going to give that a bit of a trim. Now on some of the larger cup chains, you will find that some of the backing you are actually able to pull that out, but on the smaller cup chain it just seems to disappear inside the backing and you don't need to overly worry about it. So I'm always going to keep my residues. I'll show you again on the piece I'm wearing in a moment how I've just added a couple of little dangles from the bottom of the pendant to further enhance it. In fact, I'll show you that now. So with this piece, I've got some lovely silver sheen obsidian, and I've gone for multicoloured metals on this one. I'm using raw copper wire with the gold-plated Swarovski cup chain, and then a silver sheen obsidian, all hung from a silver necklace. So we've got all those multiple colours, and then down at the base we've got this lovely additional dangle section, which is fairly easy to craft, but what I'm going to show you today is the cold formed bezeling aspect of the technique. So we've made sure that we've got enough of the cup chain to circle the gemstone from around about 1 to 11 o'clock. If you need to trim away one of these pieces, you can use them in your resin designs, or you can find use for it somewhere else, even if it just sits around on a table. They're quite pretty and sparkly. So I'm going to pop my cabochon out of the way for the moment. As I say, this is a slender cab by comparison to some of the pieces I work with. So I'm just going to pop that up in the corner for the moment. Now my wire that is fine, 0.4mm or 26 gauge, I don't want to mess around with it too much because you can make it brittle and unworkable. But what we do want to make sure is that our heavier gauge, the 1mm or 18 gauge wire, is ready to work with. So for me, I find it easier to lay the two pieces parallel and drop the cup chain over the top with 3 or 4 sections sticking out over one end. Now I'm always going to be working at the centre of the long rods of the 1mm 18 gauge wire. This is my heavy frame wire. So I'm just going to line those up, albeit that they will stay slightly flexible. Now throughout this technique we want the cup chain to sit inside between those two parallel lines of the copper core wire. We don't want it to raise up on top, we want it to sit between, because this gives us a nice broad bezel to work with. If you put the two wires side by side and sit the cup chain over the top, it will become too narrow to function properly as a bezel. So I'm going to start working with a couple of inches of wire at one end on the finer gauge, and I'm just going to wrap that over the top of all three sections I'm holding here, and I want that to nestle down between the cup chain before I draw it underneath. So at the moment it's all very loose, nothing has been tied together just yet. I'm just going to give that a bit of tension now and draw the tail of the wire up between the next segment. You've got one of the crystals and then you have a little gap between them. So drawing the tail all the way round underneath, again making sure that the crystal cup chain sits between those two tram lines. Take the tail over the top, sitting it down in between those two crystals and drawing it across the back. Now as you draw the wire across the back of the cup chain, you can support each of those crystals. So across the back, I'm not going to flip it because it will all come apart, but you can imagine a diagonal line that goes across the back of each of those crystals in their cups and supports them. So we can add a last swoop of wire over the end of that cup chain section, and then what I'm going to do is wrap 5 times around just one of those tramline sections. So that's once and twice, 3 times, and you can finish that off a bit later if you want to. It just needs to be nice and neat because you will see some of that on the surface of your design. Now what I'm going to do is make sure that I trim away so that the end sits inside between those two tram lines, and so that it won't hurt either the gemstone or yourself when you're wearing the pendant. So I'm just going to make sure that that's nice and tight before giving it a very gentle squeeze. Now as you turn the design around to further continue working it together, it is quite likely that things might come slightly unravelled. So try not to worry too much and just pick it up at the other end. I'm just going to open those two tram lines out ever so slightly, and then I'm going to lay the wire so that it continues between each of those cup chains, like so. And what we might do is just speed through this next section slightly, but I'll cover a couple more segments with you. It doesn't take too long to do. The real key to this technique is getting the wire to sit between the Swarovski crystal sections, and also making sure that you don't draw the two heavier gauge wires too closely together and thus make it too narrow. So we're just at the last couple now, and what we're going to do is make sure that we've got those sections of crystal supported. The wire sits down between each of them, like so, and then we're going to finish with a single swoop around both of those wires, exactly as we did at the other end. Give that a bit of a squeeze to get a good shape, and then, like we did at the beginning, wrap 5 times around the one side, so that's twice, 3 times, whoops, missed, 4 times, and that 5th time. So we're going to make sure that's nice and tight, again trimming so that that sits inside the framework. Give that a bit of a squeeze with your chain nose pliers. Make sure that you're happy with how that all sits. Now crystals are modified glass, so you really don't want to be pressing down over the top of the crystals, but what you can do is just make sure that you're happy with how each of those little swoops of wire sits in between. So hopefully at this stage you've got a nice channel set crystal cup chain to use for your cold set bezel. So if you pop back down to the board with me now, I'll show you how to shape it and how to join those together. So with a gemstone of this kind of size, I tend to use a ring mandrel, and I'll go slightly smaller than the size that I'm looking to create. And I'm looking to get that to start curving around the middle of the crystal chain, so that that sits in kind of like an oval shape. Get the ring mandrel back out of the way, and then here's the technique. You just push the upper wire so that it sits inside, and then allow that to sit over the surface of your chosen gemstone. So just going to give that a bit of a push so that it sits at the correct angle to nestle just over the outer surface, the outer upper surface. So that looks like a pretty good matchup to me. So what we want to do now is to take those two wires at the back out of the way, because what we need to do is to tie a good secure circle at the top of our cold bezel. So the framework will tend to move and relax slightly once you take pressure off it. Another thing with the cup chain is that it's quite stretchy. It's weird because you've got little individual links between each of the cups. So if it's not quite long enough, you can actually stretch that up slightly and make it just a little larger. And conversely, you can pack it down a little bit more closely together. So I'm going to pop my cabochon into position and see how that's looking. Now you can, if you want to, do this all at the same time with the wooden mandrel, but I actually prefer to do this top bit by hand. So we're ignoring these two rear wires and we're working on the front wires at the moment. And what I think I might do is take the left one over the top and the right one underneath, and just start moulding those around so that they're crossing over at the 12 o'clock position. What we need to do here is we're going to tie these two wires together in a way. What we need to do is make sure that we tie them tight enough so that they house the cabochon and it doesn't push forwards through the design and escape into infinity. So what we're going to do is to create some very simple loops. So just take your time, because once you cut the wire you then have to redo it if you cut it too short. So I can see that these are going to need to come much more closely over the top, like so. I think that's going to be quite a good fit. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with the underneath wire, and I'm going to come in with my old trusty faithful sparkle handed bent chain nose pliers and just put a turn on that wire so that it comes up and forwards from the design. Pop the cabochon back in. That's looking like it's going to fit really well. So what I'm going to do is make an estimation, and I'm going to cut around about 6 or so millimeters from the end of that, from where the bend is, and I'm just going to draw that back on itself. And at this stage you can ascertain if you can shave another little bit off. So I'm going to take another millimeter of wire away there before squeezing that very gently closed. The wires need to not cross over, but they need to just line up neatly. Pop my cabochon back into position, and I've still got the opportunity at this stage to make some minor adjustments if I want to. So I'm just going to give that a gentle squeeze, always being respectful of the crystals and the gemstones. And then I'm going to bring back the wire that is the other upper wire, put a bend on it just like so. And at every stage of the game, you make adjustments and you just make sure that you're happy with that. So I can see that that can be just slightly further to the left, like so. And I think by the time I've bent that around, that will actually fit really neatly. Take another little millimeter there. So again, I'm going to trim away. I'll probably just go straight for about 4 or 5 millimeters this time. And I'm going to take this tail. I hope you can see this sits nice and clearly. Take the tail back into position so that it meets itself, like so. And now we can see if our cold bezel is going to work. You still have the option to make this slightly smaller if you need to. That's actually worked really, really well. So we're going to flip that over and take a look. By the time that's sewn into position, that's going to be pretty tidy and pretty secure. If you were worried that it was slightly too large, you can very carefully open that up and just shave another millimetre away, little by little, until that's exactly perfect for your cabochon. So I'm just going to make that bend a little bit further towards the end, pull it into position. Whoops. It's hard to show it to the camera as well as get that close-up vision field. So just closing that up so that it's a secure loop at the top there, making sure that you can still see some of that Swarovski sparkle. Pop your cab in, and that's a really good, neat fit. Now the rear wires, so you can see there that I've put a very simple bail at the top of this piece because I wanted it to be all about the gemstone and the sparkle of that cup chain. So the addition of the excess, the spare bits of cup chain that I've had is quite attractive, I think. But at the top of the piece, which I will show on the outro to this video, very simple bail with just a simple loop sitting down over the top of the surface of the gem in question. So if we pop back down to the board, I'll show you how to continue. So I'm just popping the gemstone out of position for a moment, and what I'm going to do is make sure that I'm happy with the symmetry of the tying together bit at the top. And as I said earlier, you can move the cup chain. It will slightly contract or expand if you need it to. It's really versatile, and I genuinely love working with this. So I'm really delighted with how that's coming together. So what I'm going to do is just take these rear wires, draw them round as if they were going to continue to house that cabochon, like so. And I'm just going to do very simple, as I normally do, just quite a simple bail, and I'll show this at the end of the video as well. Just flip those over and have a little 12 o'clock position coming up, which you can then weave in any which way you fancy. So what you could do, of course, is add this to one of the multi-purpose bails that we've made in previous videos, which I don't have to hand. Oh no, I do, here it is. Or you could make a little dream catcher or dream weaver style back for it. But the very simple idea is to add some of that 0.4mm gauge or 26 gauge wire that we were using earlier. So if I pop that over on its belly and grab a small section of wire, you don't need really any more than 6 or 8 inches, but I tend to work with a little bit more. This is 10 inches, just to make sure that I have access to everything I need. Now, if you look at the back of the design here, we've got some weaving on this end, sorry, some coiling rather on this end. So I'm going to start on the opposite side, just for the sake of aesthetics. What I'm going to do is just coil around a couple of times, but at the end of my technique, I would ensure that that's all neat and tidy. So for the sake of aesthetics, there are 5 coils that we did at the end of each of those cup chain sections. So I'll probably go for the same number here, just so that the casual observer will notice that you've spent time working on your symmetry and making that as perfect as you possibly can. So you can take a little bit more time to make that super neat. And all we're going to do is corset this cabochon into our cold bezeled segment that we've made, like so. So I've started up on the top right. What I might do is just whiz down really very quickly and just find apertures in the cup chain channel set that we made, like so. And you can do this symmetrically, or you can do it much more finely than this. Just pushing that into position to make sure that it holds its shape. You can work with a slightly heavier wire, but it will of course make a slightly heavier pendant piece. So drawing the wire over the top, again finding an access point inside the channel that we've created with the cup chain. Just push that through. If you need help, you can grab the tail of that wire with your pliers and pull that through. The apertures are there, sometimes you just need to work to find them. So I'm going around the outside of that outer wire, and I'm only doing a couple of example weaves on this piece just to show you the technique. You can work much more finely and much more securely. This is really just to show you the technique, and once you come down to the bottom, you can draw that back up to the top. As I say, you could work with a significantly larger amount of wire and then use it to create your bail if you wanted to. You don't have to, you can add on extra wire, but I do just have a little bit here to work with as an example, one of the ways that you could create your bail. The reason I'm tying it off is because it enables me to see that my cab is now 100% secure inside this design. So I'm just going to give that a really hearty push, and the ever faithful shake test. So giving that a really lovely shake, I can see that that is nicely set into position. And on this section, I've made it as a component and added it to the base of this traditional bezel set moonstone. They look quite cute together. And then you've got a little bit of excess of cup chain to play with. So I'll pop a photograph just at the end of this video so you can see what this one looks like, and I'll just neatly finish off the one we've worked on in the tutorial for today. I hope you've enjoyed cold bezeling with Swarovski Cup Chain, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. My next Monday Live is just coming up around the corner. It's 8 PM GMT on my Facebook page, which is Jem Hawkes and Jem's Gem Box. Thank you for continuing to support me here on YouTube. It's my pleasure to be with you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.